We're going to be in Ruth chapter 3 today as we move through this biblical love story, if you will, this biblical romantic comedy. There's not a whole bunch of comedy in it, but that's what we're calling it. And so we're going to do a quick, on the last episode of Ruthless Love. I just came up with that. That's pretty good. We saw in chapter 1 that Naomi and her family, right? Elimelech, her husband, and her two sons, they move away from Bethlehem. They move out of Judah, the land of God. They move into Moab. And there, she loses her husband, she loses her two children, and so her and her daughter-in-law, Ruth, decide that they are going to go back to Bethlehem. They're going to return to the land of their God, and they do that, and at the end of chapter 1, Naomi says that she went out away from Bethlehem full, and now she is returning to Bethlehem empty. If you remember that, she says she is returning empty. She changed her name to Mara because she was bitter. And Ruth is now a widow in a foreign land who really has no way to care for herself. And so then in chapter 2, it kind of turns a little bit. The tides begin to turn because we are introduced to a man named Boaz. And Boaz deals kindly with Ruth, and he allows Ruth to glean from his fields. And he says he gives her a place of belonging. He gives her protection. He offers her some refreshment in the way that he cares for her and cares for Naomi. And so what we begin to see towards the end of chapter 2 is we begin to see this shift. There begins to be hope from Naomi. There begins to be hope within Ruth, and the story begins to kind of change. We begin to build up into chapter 3, what we have today, especially hope from Naomi. As Alex talked about last week, that she was once bitter and now she is rejoicing and praising God for the way that he has provided through Ruth. And so, as we go into the text today, I want to make a quick kind of disclaimer, something important that we need to know as we read God's word. Okay, oftentimes God's word is not prescriptive, but it is descriptive. Okay, a lot of times when we read the New Testament and it says like, do this, don't do that, live this way, don't live that way, right? We begin to think, okay, the Bible is very prescriptive. I need to follow what it says. But then there's also parts of the Bible that maybe you would be wise in not living like those people. You see, in this book and in what we're looking at today, it is a book of history. It's not advice. There's a lot of things in the Bible that you don't want your children to grow up and follow along. You don't want them to try to be those people. There are things that, not everything in the Bible is advice to you in the way that you should live. Not everything in the Bible is a way that we should model our lives, and there's a lot in the Bible that is not even condoned by other parts of the Scriptures. And so today's text, I believe, is largely descriptive. It is a story of a family. Is a story of an ancient Israelite woman and an ancient Israelite man, and it is a story of this family and God moving through this family. It is not a book on how to find your spouse. Okay? I need to say that up front because I have read some commentaries and I've seen some pastors that have tried to pull things out of this text that I think might be a little heretical, okay? Because it is not necessarily a good idea to do the things that we're going to see today. But there are things that we can get from this scripture today. There are things that we can glean from the text that I believe will help us apply it to our lives so we can live more like Christ. There are things that we will read today that even more so will point us to God. It'll point us to God and his goodness and the promises that he has for us. And so our main point this morning is that God is a redeemer. God is a redeemer no matter your story. No matter your past, no matter the mistakes you've made, no matter the things that you have done, no matter how faithless you are, God is a faithful redeemer. And so through this story, we see that he is a redeemer for Naomi, he is a redeemer for Ruth, and he is a redeemer for us. Through his providence, through his provision, through his care and love for us. We aren't defined by our stories, but we are defined by God's faithfulness, that he stepped into our lives. And so because of that, we're going to see that we actually have an ability to play a part in redemption for others. We have a part that we can play, that we can lead others toward redemption because God has redeemed us. And so that's really what we're going to be looking at today. So let's go ahead and open up to Ruth chapter 3 if you have your Bibles. If you don't, it'll be up here behind me. We're going to start today with Naomi and Ruth getting together and discussing their next moves. Okay, and so we have a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law are coming together. If we don't see the work of God anywhere else in this text, we see it in that this mother-in-law and daughter-in-law are like best friends, and so God is moving in this family. Our first point today is a hopeful plan. That's the first kind of scene that we're going to look at. A hopeful plan, verses 1 through 5. It says, Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight on the threshing floor. So wash therefore and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and then he will tell you what to do. And she replied, All that you say I will do. So we see that Naomi cares deeply for Ruth. As in the same way that Ruth cared deeply for Naomi and followed her to Bethlehem, now Naomi is caring for Ruth and saying, shouldn't I help you find rest? Shouldn't I help you make your situation turn out a little better? You can imagine the difficult situation that Ruth was in, to be a young widow in a foreign land without really any way of providing for herself. That she was far from home. She didn't have family with her besides Naomi, who was also an older widow. And so Naomi, though, is filled with hope. She is filled with excitement at Boaz. This is what we saw in chapter 2, that Boaz was a kind man. He was a generous man, and he gave them food, and he took care of them, and he offered safety and protection to them. That he has been kind to Ruth, and he has shown kindness to Naomi, and that he actually sent Ruth home with food specifically for Naomi. And so now Naomi has taken on the role of matchmaker, right? She's not going to let Ruth pass up on this man, Boaz, this fine, gray-haired, older gentleman who was taking care of her and was a good man who was going to keep her safe and take care of her as she should. But the plan for Ruth here is essentially to put herself out there. Right? It's a kind of grand gesture that you'll see a lot of times in romantic movies, right? There's always this climactic moment where the man or the woman will put themselves out there. They will make a grand gesture. I feel like a lot of the time it's at an airport terminal. I don't know why. That's where they choose. But this is not an airport terminal. This is at a threshing floor. Ooh, ah. The threshing floor would have been an elevated area, most likely near the fields, near the barley fields, and it would be elevated so that it could be kind of catch more of the wind, catch more of the breeze, because this is where they would actually separate the chaff from the grain, the chaff from the barley or the wheat or whatever crop they had. And so it would be an open area, and they would actually have animals walk all over the grain, and then that would kind of break it down, and then they would lift it up and throw it in the air, and the grain would fall back down because it's heavier, and the chaff and all the extra stuff would blow away in the wind. And so this is the place for this love story, right? It's a beautiful place. If you were writing a book, this is where you would have the love story take place. But the thing is there were other men there. There were other men that would also be winnowing this barley. There would be other men that would be working. And so Naomi lays out this plan. She starts off with, wash yourself, get dressed, and put on some perfume. You know what? That's a pretty good start. I told you that this is not a book on how to find your spouse, but maybe that is a good place to start for all of us. But she says, don't let Boaz see you until he has already eaten, till he has already drank. And that's also not a bad idea. Men, better moods whenever they got a full belly. But then it gets a little weird, okay? And so then we see Naomi says, hey, and then notice where he sleeps. Find where he sleeps, because these men would sleep. This would be late in the evening whenever they would do this, and then they would eat and they would drink, celebrate a long day of work, and this was towards the end of the harvest season, so we know that there was probably a lot of barley that they were harvesting. They were probably tired. They were excited because the grains and the what they were able to take in. And so they would sleep either leaning against the piles of barley or nearby it to protect it from robbers and thieves. And so Ruth is to figure out where he is sleeping, and then she is told to quietly walk over to where he is sleeping and uncover his feet. This is beautiful, just romantic as all get out. Now, this seems really strange to us. It's like what in our context and in our 21st century, we have no idea what's happening here. It is strange, but this would have signified that Ruth was humbly putting herself out there. She was humbly proposing to Boaz that she would be taken as his wife. She is humbly just putting herself out there, making her intentions very clear. And so Ruth agreed to do exactly as Naomi instructed her. And again, this is a sign of her respect for Naomi, of her love for Naomi, that they were committed to each other and they loved one another. And so I think it's important that we see here, and we kind of talked about it last week, but what did hope do here? The hope that Boaz brought into the picture, the things that he offered to them completely shifted the trajectory and shifted the attitude of these women. Right? See, because of the provision of Boaz, because of what he had done, now Naomi had some confidence in what was taking place. She had a confidence that moved her to action, right? It wasn't like she sat around and she was like, well, yeah, he got us some food, but we still aren't married. What are we going to do? She wasn't mopey. She wasn't complaining. She didn't just have wishful thinking that things would get better, but it drove her to do something. And I think this is similar to our relationship with God. Right? If our hope, our trust, if our confidence is in God and what he can do and what the power that he has, that he can change our stories, that he can make things better, we don't sit around distant from God just hoping that he will step in, but we actually look to God and we say, God, where are you leading me? And what have you put in place that I can step into so that you can move? How can I be faithful so that you can do what you do best and your provision and your care? And so is your walk defined by the hope in what God is able to do and what God is leading you to do? Or are you comfortable sitting around, possibly wishing and moping and hoping that he will step in and do everything for you? When hope is based on who God is and it's based on what God says, it leads us to faithful action. It leads us to trust and to follow him. And so Naomi and Ruth, they took action. Even though this may not have been the wisest plan that there was. It's probably not wise for a single woman to go by herself late at night to an area where men have been drinking and are now merry, and she is by herself in a dark place. It wasn't necessarily custom for a servant girl to approach a master or an owner of a field and require of him to take her as his wife. That wasn't normal, that wasn't custom, and it probably wasn't wise, but they were taking action because they had hope and they saw that God was moving. And so we continue through this hope and through the leading of Naomi. Ruth is now going to do what she was instructed by Naomi. And so our next scene is that we see a courageous proposal in verse 6 through 10. So then she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. And she came softly and uncovered his feet and laid down. And at midnight the man was startled and turned over. And behold, a woman lay at his feet. And he said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." So Ruth did everything that Naomi instructed her to do. She went, and I do wish the text kind of gave us more of Ruth's emotions and Ruth's feelings in all of this. It talks a lot. You can read the excitement, and you can read into the excitement of Naomi. You'll see in just a second. You can see how Boaz is excited and his intentions, but it doesn't really give us a lot of Ruth's intentions and her thoughts. And so I just have questions like, was she actually into Boaz? Like, seriously. Was she just honoring her mother-in-law and knew that if she did this, it would take care of her mother-in-law and it would actually be better for herself? Was this kind of a green card situation, if you will? Is it just practical and for her benefit? I don't know. Everybody talks about it being a love story. Maybe I'm cynical, but I don't really see the love. But what I do see is faithfulness, and what I do see is obedience. And you know what? That's probably more important. And so she went down to the threshing floor. She uncovered his feet, and then she laid there until he noticed her. And so something woke Boaz up. Maybe it was the fact that his feet got cold. Maybe he heard something. I don't know. But something woke him up, and it says that he was startled. Right? Remember, he is sleeping there for a reason, to protect his grain, to protect his crop from robbers. And I think, as Ruth is laying there at his feet, she's lucky she didn't get kicked in the face. But he looks and he sees her and he says, "Who are you?" He sees it's a woman and he says, "Who are you?" And she responds, and this is a beautiful response from Ruth. And this is actually something that Naomi never instructed her to say. Naomi didn't tell her to do this. This is all Ruth. She says, "It is Ruth, your servant." She continues to be humble. She continues to be vulnerable. She continues to show her respect for Boaz. And then she says, "Spread your wings over your servant." Another translation might say, "Spread your garment over your servant." Right? This was a symbol of a servant. This was a symbol of somebody lowly being at your feet and saying, "Spread your garment over me, protect me." And it actually signified taking me as your wife. Right? In Ezekiel chapter 16, God uses this very same metaphor. That he was taking into care, he was taking into protection the nation of Israel, the city of Jerusalem, when he says, God says, "I shall cover your nakedness and shall enter a covenant with you." Right? He is taking Israel as his bride to protect her, to care for her, so that she now has belonging under his cloak, in his wings, as a mother bird would care for a baby bird. And Ruth here is painting the same picture, that she's looking for safety. She is looking for rest. She is looking for protection and provision in Boaz, and she is offering herself as his wife. And so Ruth is shooting her shot. She's making it clear what her intentions are. And then the last thing she says is, "For you are a redeemer." Right? This word has popped up a couple times in the book of Ruth already, but we're going to break it down and really look at what this means right here. She says, "You are a redeemer." The actual word she used would have been goel. You are a goel. This was translated into a kinsman redeemer. A kinsman redeemer, or a goel, the idea is that it is a family member who would care for and take care of their family, specifically when the man of that family is no longer there. Right? So in the Old Testament, the Mosaic Law, we get a few rules and responsibilities for a goel. Right? A goel was to buy family members out of slavery. If somebody had fallen into slavery, or maybe something happened where they were sold into slavery, it would be the goel's responsibility to see that family member that they cared for, that was part of God's people, that was part of the lineage of God's people, and to get them, to buy them out of slavery, to put them back on their feet, if you will. Another responsibility was to buy back the family land. If they were to lose their land for one reason or another, if a goel was at all possible for them, they would buy that land. Right? We look at the Old Testament, and it's not as important now for us. We don't have the same ideas, but the land that God had gifted to Israel was gifted to them as a purpose, right? It was a promised land. It was important. It was a big deal for the tribes of Israel. Another one, they would to avenge the blood of a family member who was murdered. All right. We'll move on. And this one that we're really looking at today is that they would marry the widow of a childless widow if the family member, the husband, the dad, if the husband did not have a child. So they would marry this childless widow. They would conceive to carry on the line of this family, to take care of the widow, one, but to carry on the name of like Elimelech, as we look at. And so now we see why Naomi earlier was like, hey, isn't Boaz one of our family members? Like, that's why she's so excited about this. That's why she has hope, is because Boaz isn't just some guy with a farm that she wants Ruth to go talk to. Boaz is actually a kinsman redeemer. He is a goel, and he has a responsibility as this family member to carry on this legacy, to care for Naomi and to care for Ruth in the name and respect of Elimelech. And so the role of a kinsman redeemer was to care for and protect the persons, the property, and the posterity of that family. That was the goal. That's what the redeemer was to do. And it went who was closest to the man. So it would go from brother to uncle, and from uncle to cousin, and then it would go just more distant, and we'll look at that in a second. But Ruth knew not only that Boaz was a good man, she not only knew that he was a godly man who cared for her and had shown to have good character, but she knew that he was a kinsman redeemer to her. So she, still being humble, did not demand that Boaz did anything. She did not demand that Boaz had this responsibility to take care of her, but she offered it to him humbly. And so this took courage for Ruth. As she put herself out there, she not only physically had to travel at night in dark places with all these other men who may or may not be drunk going around, but she had to offer herself emotionally to Boaz. But she didn't have to wait long to see how Boaz felt about her. So immediately what we see from Boaz is a faithful response. Verse 10. It says, and he said, that's Boaz, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, that there is a redeemer nearer than I. So remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning. So Boaz again shows his consistent and high character. He shows that he is a virtuous man. He shows that he is a man who cares for Ruth deeply. He shows that he is a generous, and he is willing to do this if he is able. And so he responds with gratitude. He responds with acknowledgement, to acknowledge and to encourage Ruth that he recognizes her kindness. I see your gesture. I appreciate your gesture. He says what? He says, you didn't go after young men. You didn't go after young men as you had every right to do. Right? Realize that Ruth, she wasn't part of Elimelech's family, really. She had no legal tie to that family anymore, that she could have went and found any man in any country that she wanted to, young or old, rich or poor, it didn't really matter. But what she did is she went to a man who she saw as high character, She went to a man who she knew was going to care for Naomi and herself in a godly way. And so, out of love and respect for Naomi and possibly and hopefully an attraction to Boaz, to his character and maybe physically as well, who knows, she pursued him. So Boaz affirms her. He says, "Do not fear." And he refers to her as my daughter. That's not just because he's old and she's young. What he is actually doing here when he says, "Hey, my daughter, do not fear my daughter," he is saying, hey, you are accepted into the family of God. That you are an outsider, you are a Moabite woman, but you are now being called my daughter because you are a daughter of our God, Yahweh. He recognizes her as God recognizes her. And so he says it's clear that you are a worthy woman. Boaz's intentions are made real clear in the text. He's like, oh yeah, I've been waiting. But here's the problem. He says there is another relative that is closer than I. Right, there's another. So we know that Boaz is not the brother of Elimelech, because that means he would have been as close as he could possibly be. Maybe he was the uncle of Elimelech. Who knows? But there was somebody who was closer to Elimelech than Boaz was, and so he makes it clear. Yes, I want to marry you. Yes, I'd be glad to. I'd be so happy to marry you. But he does the thing that is honorable and the thing that is right instead of simply giving in to his desires. I think this is huge. That Boaz, even though he longed for Ruth, he would rather give up being with her to do the thing that was commanded in the law of God. That he would rather give up what he wants to do what was right and to do what was virtuous. His character is obvious, and his character is one that was trusting in God. See, another thing is he wanted something for Ruth more than he wanted something from Ruth. He wanted to see that Ruth was cared for more than he cared about it being him that received her. So real quick, I just want to comment on this. Young men in the room, do you honor the rules? Do you honor the requests when you are dating? Do you honor the word of God when you are dating and in relationships more than you honor your own desires? Do you care about what's best for the young woman more than you care about what you want? Young women, if he doesn't, he's not the man for you. If he does not honor your parents' wishes in dating, if he tries to go around the rules, if he tries to bend your requests that you have in dating, he's not the guy for you. But a man of high character and a godly man sets down his own desires to do the thing that is right. To honor God, to honor you, to honor your family. All right. So Boaz, he respected that there was another redeemer closer than him. And he assumed that he assured Ruth that she would be redeemed. Whether it was from Boaz or was from this other relative, she would be redeemed. He assured her, he promised her, he says, you will be cared for. Whether it is by me or by somebody else, I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to make sure that even if it's him, you are going to be cared for. And this entire section is just a little crazy to me. Everything that we just read is just a little wild, that Ruth goes to a place dark, late at night, by herself, that she should have never been there by herself at all. Like, it was not wise, not in that culture, not in our culture. That is not a wise or above reproach thing to do necessarily. But then they hash out their plans for each other. They hash out these plans for their engagement and for marriage. And Boaz says, hey, it's either going to be me or this other relative. And then this text is just covered in innuendo. And there are a lot of discussions and a lot of commentaries and a lot of people that think feet doesn't mean feet. They think that maybe this is a little more adult than it is family friendly. And you know what? I don't know. The text does not make that clear, but the text also doesn't say that any of that took place. And I'm going to believe, and what I do believe, is that because of Boaz's character, and because Boaz is a man of high character and virtue, and he is above reproach, that this was purely family friendly and just really, really strange. And so, that's not what matters most from this text anyways. Whether that happened or not, what we see is that Boaz cared for her, that a godly man dealt kindly with a Moabite woman who had no rights for him to deal kindly with her, but he vowed to see that she was redeemed. He vowed to change her future, that Boaz tells Ruth to lay down at his feet until the morning. And I believe that this is a sign that there was no extra foul play in there, that he is trying to keep her safe from traveling home at night, that he cares for her. He wants to honor her and her wishes. And then to close out our story today, we have our final point. Our next scene is there is rest in the promise. Rest is found in the promise. Verse 14, so she lay at his feet until the morning. But she arose before one could recognize another, and he said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. And he said to her, bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. And then she went into the city, and when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, how did you fare, my daughter? Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me. For he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. She said, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. So Boaz sends Ruth home, not empty-handed. He cares for her. He makes sure she goes when nobody can see her. This is to protect her reputation. This is to also protect if this other kinsman redeemer was to marry her, this would have ruined the chances if she had just slept with another man the night before. And so he protects her. He protects anybody from thinking something scandalous may have happened. And then he gathers up some barley and he sends her home with it. And what does he say? Give it to your mother-in-law Naomi so that she will not be empty-handed. Do you remember what Naomi said when she first returned to Bethlehem? I went out full, but I came back empty. And now she is being filled up again. Through the faithfulness, through the generosity, through the care and provision of Boaz, who is a picture of Jesus, she is being filled up. God is showing her through the godly man of Boaz that God is still there, that God is still caring for her, that her story is not done, that she has hope in a future. She is not empty. She will not be empty and abandoned and forgotten, that she is cared for and she is being filled up again. And I hope that resonates with some of you. I hope you know that life may be keeping you down, that you may feel empty, but in Jesus, through God's provision and care and love for his children, may he fill you up again. But Naomi's response here again is one of further hope. As her hope continues to build upon itself, she says, wait, but know that everything is going to be okay. He is going to figure this out for you, Ruth, that you will figure out what is going to happen this day, that she has full confidence in Boaz because she knows the type of man that Boaz is. She knows that he is a man of God. She has seen his provision. She has seen his care, and she knows that God is beginning to move in this story. So she tells Ruth to rest in the promise. She tells Ruth, wait. he's going to figure it out. And you can find rest and you can find hope in the promise that he is going to come through. And so this is kind of where the story ends today. Next week in chapter 4, we're going to see a resolution to this story, but this is kind of this climactic moment where they come together. There's a plan in place, like everything looks good. Everything seems to be going well for them. But as we close, I want us to point out a few things that we can learn from this chapter, from this text. I said it's not all prescriptive, but I think there is some that we can glean from it. When we look at Naomi and Ruth, we see that they were faithful, right, in their actions. They were courageous in the plans that they made to not be okay to sit back and be bitter, but they moved forward trusting that God was going to move. They pursued rest in Boaz. They pursued rest and security. They didn't stay bitter. They didn't stay upset in the situation that they were in, but they saw God's providence. They saw that God's hand was all over their lives, and they took a step towards him. They had an effort to move towards that. And we can also see an example of how a godly man should live in Boaz. We can see that we should operate above reproach, that we should live the same way we do in public as we do in private. Right? If you remember back to chapter 2, the beginning of chapter 2, Boaz, when he was with his workers, he said, God bless you and be with you, my workers, my friends. Right? So he is a man of God when he's in front of people. Is he a man of God when he's in private? And I think we see that, yes, he is. That's a true man of God. But he was kind, he was generous, not only with his things, with his crops, but he was also generous with his words and his affirmations. He was virtuous. He provided for others and cared for others. Out of his own blessing that he had received, he then gave. But what I hope we see in all of this story, what I hope we see more than all of those things that we can try to do and the examples that they made that we can try to live by, I hope what we see, especially in the kinsman redeemer, that this is a story of Jesus. And I hope that we can look at this story and we can glorify and honor and praise Jesus because he is our kinsman redeemer. Because he is the one who stepped in when we were foreigners, when we were outcasts, when we were lost, when we had no hope, and he stepped in and he provided and he cared and he loved for us. This is a picture of God's redemption of his people. That Ruth didn't deserve it. She was a stranger, she was an outcast, but then she met a man who was kind and generous, who was a provider, and he was able to offer her hope for the future, to fix her situation that had no hope. That he cared more what he can do for her than what he could get from her. And isn't that the story of Jesus with us? That we had nothing that we could bring and that we could offer Christ, but he gave himself up for us while we were still sinners. He died for us. Look at the bookend verses of this chapter. Verse 1, Naomi says to Ruth, should I not seek rest for you? And look at the last verse of the chapter, verse 18. Naomi says to Ruth, he will not rest until this matter is settled. The rest that Ruth was going to receive only came from the lack of rest from Boaz. The righteousness that we receive only comes from the righteousness of Jesus. Jesus gave up his rest in heaven, sitting perfectly in paradise with the Father at the right hand of God, and he stepped down and he gave up that rest to take on human flesh, to live as a perfect, sinless, spotless man, and he gave that up so that we can now have rest and have a relationship with the Father. Jesus sacrificed his union with God so that we could have it. Jesus, in order for us to have true life, gave up his own life. And in order for us to be free from our sin, he took our sin upon himself. Jesus is our Redeemer. And in this beautiful story, because this is our story, we are just like Ruth. We we're hopeless and lost outside of God's family, but because of one who is greater, because of one who is perfect and righteous and holy, we are now brought into his generosity, to his kindness, to his love, and to his care, to his joy, and to his peace and rest. So, I pray that you can find rest in the promises of God and the promises that Jesus has offered to us. May you find rest. Don't search for it anywhere else. Don't try to find rest in another field. Don't try to find rest from a younger man, if you will. But go to the place where we can find security and we can find acceptance, we can find peace and love and so much more. So how are we to be the church? How are we to display the kingdom? Let your hope in Jesus move you to action. That's the first thing. What do we see from this story? That the hope that they had changed the way that they live, right? So we have hope. We can take courageous steps like Ruth and Naomi, right? We can take courageous steps trusting that God's going to care for us, that he's going to take care of us. And then we can also, because of our hope in Jesus, like Boaz, because the hope of things promised actually led him to be generous and to be kind and to care for others, right? So the hope in Jesus does not just lead to one outcome, but for these ladies, it led them take a faithful and bold step. But for Boaz, because he had hope in what God was doing, he could be generous and care for others just as we can, because we have been redeemed. And then the second thing, find rest in the kinsman redeemer. Find rest in Jesus. Find your rest in him. Do you trust in God's promises for your life? Do you trust that you will not be forsaken or forgotten? Do you trust that his ways are better than your ways? Do you trust that he is working things out for the good of those who love him? Or do you look to others to find the rest that you can only get satisfied in him? I pray you would find your rest in him. Let's pray.